We're good there. Okay. All right. So thank you everyone for joining in tonight for Northwest Indiana Green Drinks. Whether you're joining us here on Zoom or on Facebook Live, we're happy to see everyone here tonight. And as you know, we're covering a really important topic this evening. And right now, the state session currently in progress. And as an environmental organization, we are seeing trends that are very unsettling. And so, in honor of the state session, every February, Northwest Indiana Green Drinks welcomes an advocate closely involved with lobbying at our Indiana Statehouse to present. Tonight we have Hoosier Environmental Council's David Van Gilder, who's going to give us the lowdown on what's been happening at the state this session and some bills that you may want to be looking out for. And so we also joined tonight with Harshini, who is our advocacy coordinator at Save the Dunes. And go ahead, Harshini, if you want to.
Yeah, thanks so much. So thanks so much everyone for joining us. So we're thrilled to have David here tonight with us, as Em said, from Hoosier Environmental Council, or HEC as I call them for short. We're so honored to meet. I was so honored to meet David when I was down this last week for Conservation Day at the Indiana Statehouse in Indianapolis. And we're so grateful not only just to David, but to the entire policy team at HEC to help not only our organization understand these really complex state legislator issues, but as stated in their mission, work across the entire state of Indiana to help Hoosiers advocate and embrace practices and policies that dramatically reduce the footprint of industry, commerce, and agriculture on the environment. So today we're going to look for clarity on questions like, why is it so important to know what's happening environmentally at our Indiana Statehouse? When is it time for you to contact your state representative or your state senator regarding any legislation going on? How could you become more involved to help pass supportive bills and stop destructive ones? So with that, I will pass it back to you, Em.
All right. Just one more quick note while we're live on Facebook that this meeting is being recorded, and then will be available tomorrow afternoon on our YouTube. And we encourage you to share it along with your networks and on social media. If you care about this topic, you probably have someone else in your life that would love to get this information too. So with that, I'll hand it over to David.
Thanks, Sam and Harshini. And great to see all the people on this. And hopefully there's a lot of people on the live stream through Facebook as well. My name is David Van Gilder. I'm relatively new with the Hoosier Environmental Council as a staff person, but I've been involved with HEC since about 1991. As a board member on the board of directors back when Save the Dunes and other organizations usually came to fisticuffs at our annual meeting, trying to figure out what would be the important issues for the coming year. HEC has settled down a little bit from those days, but we have an absolute fantastic group of people who make things happen with our work. And so I encourage you all to get to the HEC website if anything I say kind of sparks greater interest in getting involved with the legislative process. I want to go over some really important things tonight, but also want to answer questions if you have them. I think Em has dropped in or will drop into the chat some connections, some links that we have for immediate sort of action things that we think are important for people to take now. And so I'm going to jump right in and talk about a couple of the really important bills that have moved swiftly. But just before I do that, I want to give kind of a real broad overview. The legislative session this year is called a short session, and we heard all before the session that no one wanted it to be controversial. No one wanted to deal with heavy lifting kind of issues, but that is not possible with this group of legislators. So there's lots of controversy, but it's all moving very quickly. In a short session, typically it's going to be about 9 weeks, started January 6th, I think, and is supposed to wrap up March 14. But we keep hearing that they want to get done a week early. So they really want to do a lot of preparations in advance of St. Patrick's Day. So they want to get out early. I think that's not really it, but just as a real side note, just to show that I'm a real person, on St. Patrick's Day, I will be marching in the annual St. Patrick's Day parade in Michigan City with the Fort Wayne Scottish Pipe and Drum Band. I play drums in a pipe band. And so last year it was a great deal of fun. The year before it was about 2 degrees and was not a great deal of fun. So, but if you go to that parade, I'll be in it marching, and you can throw things at me as long as they're soft. All right, so the bills that we're really interested in this year, the first one, the most highest priority one, is called HB 1383. It's a bad wetlands bill, and by bad I mean it's billed that it's being peddled to legislators as a compromise bill between the Indiana Department of Environmental Management and the builders. So ostensibly, it has the support of IDEM, which means it's sort of being directed by the governor. In many ways, we call this sort of the governor's bill because he's in charge of IDEM as an executive, the executive branch in charge of the administrative agencies. So what 1383 does that's particularly damaging is it takes the highest value wetlands and takes 6 of the really important wetland categories, the types of wetlands, like forested wetlands, for example, and moves them to a lower level of protection. So it takes a good deal of highly protected wetlands and puts them in a lower level. And then it requires that those lower level what we call class 2 wetlands have other attributes that would get them protected. So the bottom line of this bill is that it takes more acreage that should be protected and leaves it unprotected. And this is particularly nefarious in the state of Indiana because 2 years ago, the legislature passed a bill that basically gutted most of state wetlands protections for many wetlands all around the state. And then last May, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision that took out from federal protection a whole nother segment of wetlands. So it's a lot of words and a lot of numbers, but the thing to recall or to remember is that Indiana has now lost upwards of 93% of its wetlands that existed at the time of settlement. So we've got 7% left. And since legislation passed 2 years ago, only 25% of the wetlands that have been built upon in the past 2 years have been mitigated. That is, have had some sort of compensation, building other wetlands or preserving other wetlands to make up for the loss of wetland ecosystem services, which we pretty much all can recite in our sleep, it'd be my guess. So at any rate, so it's a real bad bill, and it got a hearing yesterday that went about 3.5 hours. It zoomed through the Senate Environmental Affairs Committee and is likely to be on the Senate floor this coming Monday, the 5th, and could get final passage in the Senate on Tuesday, the 6th. It's already been passed in the House, kind of flew through the House. So it could be passed on the 6th on Tuesday. And, if the governor wanted to, he could have it on his desk at the end of the week to sign. So there's a lot of action to do here. And that is a bad bill. Now, there's some positives. Positives are that we really got the attention, we being the whole consortium of folks who testified yesterday, got the attention of a good number of Republican senators who are like, wait a minute, this is not what we were told by IDEM. We want to learn more. And so they're talking to us. They're thinking about their own possible amendments. We've got at least one Democrat senator who's advising that she was going to offer some amendments on Monday. So there's some positives because the collective force of the messaging that we've been getting out, that everybody, all of our allies have been getting out, including Save the Dunes, has really had an effect on some of these folks who thought they knew what they were doing, and turns out they didn't. So I'm guardedly optimistic that heavy lifting over the weekend and early next week, we might be able to turn the tide on the wetlands bill. And I'm happy to, again, answer any questions as they come up. And maybe, you can, since I can't do two things at once, maybe if there's a question that you can interrupt me with, that's great too. So another bill that was in the Senate seems like it only affects Indianapolis. So you might say, well, why, up here in Michigan City, Elkhart area, Save the Dunes, why are we concerned so much? It's a bill called SB 52, and it affects specifically the blue line in Indianapolis. It says basically, we don't want dedicated bus lanes for rapid transit. And it seems to be targeted, again, for Indianapolis rapid transit, but it actually has statewide effect. So if somebody in Northwest Indiana or in my hometown of Fort Wayne or down in Bloomington at IU wanted to consider rapid transit buses, they would be prohibited from dedicating bus lanes for rapid transit. You may recall that 6 or 7 years ago, the General Assembly, in its infinite wisdom, basically said we cannot have light rail anywhere in Indiana. No light rail. So that's already off the table for rapid transit, and there's really only one other option, which would be a dedicated rapid transit bus, which typically requires dedicated lanes. So even though it seems like a kind of a parochial bill that affects Indianapolis, it really has statewide effects. So we're asking folks to generate some heat and action on that. And just in a minute, I'm going to I'll share the HEC website, which has a lot of these more detail in it. Back to wetlands real quick. There is a good bill called SB 246, which is we support, HEC supports. It basically allows owners of wetland areas, even small ones, less than a half an acre, to enroll their wetland acreage in a program much like classified forest and classified wildlands, programs that already exist in the state of Indiana. And once wetlands are enrolled, then the person can get less, or can pay less taxes on that, can have a reduced tax assessment. That one is very popular. Most of the senators on both sides of the aisle have said yes to this. So that's going to go over to the House in a couple weeks, and so we're going to ask people to continue to support that language because it's a positive for wetlands and encourages people to preserve them. Okay, I'll take a breath there, and I don't know whether there's any question yet, but if not, I will take a sip of my. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's no other questions coming in the chat yet, but I have a question. Do you feel that it is purposefully written, the bills are purposely written confusingly, opposing, supporting language when because I think when we've been asking people to sign on to things, it's interesting to encourage people to oppose something maybe. And so I'm curious if you can explain any of the reasonings as to how language around, a negative, and from the environmentally standpoint, a bill can be written like that.
Well, I mean, typically what they're doing is amending some section of existing state law. That's what 1383 does. That's what pretty much all the bills I'm going to talk about do. So depending on how they write the language, you know, what section of the existing state statute they want to amend, it could be a positive, environmentally positive kind of change, like adding protected wetlands to the ability to have a smaller tax bill. That's a positive thing. Or it could be a negative, like we're going to just remove protections for certain classifications, certain types of wetlands. So a bill that does something that we consider to be, harmful to environmental interests and to actually the public interest, not just environmental, but harms our kids, harms our grandkids. We're going to ask people to oppose that. So it is confusing, and what we try to do with our HEC's Bill Watch is to give people kind of a synopsis. Here's what the bill would do. Here's why we oppose it, and give them enough so they don't have to go and dig and read the whole bill unless they are super interested in doing that. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, that's great. I think it's a great explanation. Thank you so much. You can go ahead, I
Sure.
think, go ahead and share your screen so we can walk
Yeah.
through and see kind of the way folks will be able to access your guys' website, which I will also drop in the chat, and we'll see how we can get typing and doing advocacy and talking to our senators just easily through our computers.
And David,
Sure.
just to interrupt, I think there's one question about how to advocate with the governor, which is it's an interesting question.
Yeah. Let me answer that first, and then we'll get to the website. The governor is, just picture a king on a throne and with lots of people around him protecting him from bad information or negative information. But he is a guy, I've met him. He owned a dog until the dog died this year. And, he's approachable. So there's a couple of things that I would suggest. One is you can write a letter to the governor, and his staff will receive it, and they'll pass it on. And in a letter like that, you just need to be honest. Here I am. I live in such and such. I'm reaching out because I'm concerned about this topic, and then just tell the governor what you think. That's one way to do it. Another would be, we have a sign-on letter that I'll show you in just a second, specifically regarding wetlands to the governor, and you can sign on to that, which is a real easy kind of thing to do. Another thing that people can do but really don't take advantage of is you can ask individually or collectively as a member of a group to have a meeting with the governor. And that's not often granted, but honestly, if you get a group of citizens from Northwest Indiana who are passionate about an issue and want to get together and carpool and come down to Indianapolis, you could ask the governor for a meeting, and you probably would be more likely to get that than, say, I would as a member or as a staff person of the Hoosier Environmental Council, because he knows what's coming if I go into his office. But if it's a constituent, maybe he would be less inclined to say no. Now, that's again, those are ways to deal with the governor, but also with your own representative and senator. The same thing applies. They're regular people. They actually do want to hear from their constituents. You can meet them, in their home district. Usually they're home from Thursday evening through Sunday night. Or you can, come down to Indianapolis and meet them there. But I encourage that because it is, I've been doing that since I joined HEC in July. And to be honest, my opinion based upon the kind of the stuff that you get during elections is that you might have an opinion of your particular representative or senator that's wrong. And you might meet with somebody that you think you're not going to agree with, and you find commonality. You begin to establish a relationship, and maybe you don't convince each other at the first meeting, but having a relationship ongoing is really important. And they're approachable. They want to have their constituents talk to them. All right, let me look real quick at I think I'm sharing the HEC page, and we've got a couple places at the top you can do Bill Watch, but where it says take action now, you can do Bill Watch, and then you scroll down, and there's a number of tools that are really, really important. If you haven't done this before, you can find who your legislators are. You can find out, what are the most effective ways to communicate with your legislators. And then you can, if you're interested in a particular issue like wetlands, you can click on that. And there's a number of information, a number of things that we update pretty regularly about how you can interact with your legislators on that score. This is a little wonky for me because I'm trying to talk while I'm doing this, but let me see. Here we go. So one thing that you can do, this is the wetlands bill. You can just do a fill-in thing, and you can get more information from HEC, but you can also send an action alert to your legislator, your senator or representative. And you can get greater detail. You can find a little background. There's usually a couple of pictures that keep you interested. And then you can get a newsletter. So there's lots of ways to interact on this site to get your message to your legislator. There's going to be more updates yet tomorrow and Saturday, so I encourage you to kind of look at it often. Usually at HEC, we have a legislative team meeting on Thursdays, like we did this afternoon. We see what happened and we see what changes we need to make. And then typically by Friday, late afternoon, we've got updates to our website, updates to our actions, and that's how we work that. So if you're just interested general in boning up on the issues, and hold on one second, please. Okay, so if you want to bone up on some issues, we've got our topics under there. If you want to be involved beyond the session, there's things that are coming up, like April, of course, after the session is over, is going to be Earth Month, and there's things there. So there's just a lot of ways to become involved in our advocacy. And just as a reminder, of course, HEC is allied with organizations like Save the Dunes. We've had a great relationship with Save the Dunes since the 60s, 1960s, that is. And as well as a number of other, Citizens Action Coalition, Sierra Club, all the various iterations of Sierra Club, other advocacy groups all around the state. So we're in contact with each other. We work together. We share advocacy goals. We meet regularly on the wetlands issues, for example. One of the leaders on the wetlands coordination team is Audubon, Great Lakes Audubon has been really instrumental in some of our work on wetlands issues. So I'll pause there in case anybody has any questions.
There is another question in the chat I'll read. It says, could you comment on the water withdrawal issues pertaining to the IEDC's LEAP project in the Lenanon area? What adverse impacts on the river and groundwater aren't being adequately assessed, and also who owns the water? So I'm gonna ask, maybe what do you mean by what water? But if you can answer any of those other.
Yeah, sure. I'm real familiar with that. So down around Lebanon. So if you're driving north on I-65 from Indianapolis to Chicago area, you're going to pass through Lebanon, which is not too far northwest of Indianapolis. And the Indiana Economic Development Corporation over the last few years quietly amassed close to 10,000 acres. And their grand plan is to attract a whole suite of high-tech industry, and including, like chip manufacturers and high-tech stuff like that, to all set up shop in a massive, basically high-tech industrial park on these 10,000 acres. But as they were doing all of this, they realized that they needed water, because the Lebanon area, central Indiana, is really kind of water short. There's a water shortage there, and there wouldn't be enough for all the things they wanted to do. So the state then went to said, well, we'll fix this problem. We'll go and we'll build a pipeline, almost 50-mile long pipeline from the Wabash River just west of West Lafayette, and we'll pipe the water down to Boone County, to Lebanon. So from Tippecanoe County down to Boone County, we're going to pipe this water, upwards of 100 million gallons of water per day, which is, well, I don't want to misstate it, but it's a whole lot of water. It's more than Indianapolis could use in a month. So it's the problem is no one has done any studies to see whether the aquifer, the underground water associated with the Wabash River, can sustain 100 million gallons of water withdrawal a day. So, but IEDC went ahead and they said, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. So that got to be very alarming to Senator Deary and Senator Nagel up in that area. And so they both introduced bills in this session to basically say, if you're going to withdraw massive volumes of water, you have to get a permit to do that. Because right now there's no really statewide water quantity, water control set of regulations or laws. So it's real. It's really illustrative of how little we've actually considered our natural resources in the state. We just don't have any statewide water law. Neither of those bills, by the way, Senator Deary's bill, Senator Nagel's bill, got a hearing, so they're not going to go anywhere. But in the meantime, there's been enough fuss in the Lafayette area in particular that the governor said, okay, we'll assign the Indiana Finance Authority we'll task them with studying the water withdrawals. And we'll put a pause on this LEAP project, which basically stands for let's fast track everything. And while we're studying the water, we'll put a pause on things. So it sort of mollified the Lafayette people, but not 100%. And of course, it still doesn't answer the questions whether there's ever going to be enough water to support a plan like that. So that's what's going on with the water situation. And one of the things that HEC is calling for is we really need to have a statewide water policy. And so we're going to be pressing in this session, but pressing the governor, pressing the next governor, pressing our legislators, and we hope you will too, to develop a statewide water policy. One way to look at it is that many states, we read about the states in the West, Colorado, Arizona, California, who have significant water issues. There's just not enough water in the Colorado River. There's just not enough water for the growth that's going on. And we always thought that was sort of a Western problem that happens in the arid Southwest. Well, it's not. It's a Midwest problem too. And I don't think I'm speaking in hyperboles to say that water is probably the most consequential and precious natural resource we have. And it's going to be it's going to be something that starts wars all around the world, and it's going to start big fights between states and within states. And so we think it's time to get Indiana on the ball to think about this, even though most of us looking around when it's pouring down rain on a gray winter day think, well, we got plenty of water here. What's the problem? But we don't. We really don't. And so we need to start thinking about that. So that's a good question. Thank you for that one. Let me mention one other positive thing, because we want to be hopeful as well. There are a couple bills that were floating around, and now they've been consolidated into a bill that passed the Senate called SB 5. And what it does is make it easier for the state and municipalities to facilitate switching out lead water service lines and replacing them with safer service lines. If you recall, up in Flint, Michigan, of course, that was a huge disaster beginning 10 years ago. It's still an ongoing disaster because the lead pipes that were routinely used in residential building for decades leach lead into the water. Lead is just an absolute poison to children's brain development. And even with lead lines, which frankly many in Indiana cities still have, if you treat the water appropriately, you can avoid the leaching of lead into the water. But there's still a risk there. Those things can break down and there's a risk. So this bill, SB 5, is one that HEC supports. We encourage our followers to support it because it helps municipalities get ahead of that problem before there's a disaster like happened in Flint, Michigan. So that's one to support. One other bill that is troublesome, that is HEC opposes it. It's called HB 1399, and these are all on our bill watch. It has to do with a suite of chemicals called PFAS, PFAS, very complex chemicals. There's thousands of different varieties, types. You can tell I'm not a chemist. And they're really a problem because what this bill is trying to do is exempt all of these PFAS chemicals from ever being regulated in the state of Indiana. And it's foolish because A, we don't know what chemicals companies are using, and B, it's very short-sighted. It means that if we find that there's a problem next year with a particular manufacturing process that uses a particular set of PFAS chemicals, if this bill passes, we won't be able to regulate it. And that's just, it's just foolish. And on top of being dangerous and damaging to us and our future. So that's HB 13. It's on our bill watch. We encourage calls, as in all these bills, calls to your senator, representative, to either oppose or support, depending on what we tell you on our website. One thing, I'll just pause here for a second. One thing is that the easiest thing to do is to log on and to send a set email that maybe somebody else has given you. That's good. It can be effective, but the most effective thing is personal calls. You call, and we show you how to do it. You call your legislator. You're usually going to leave a message with a legislative assistant, legislative aide, but those messages get passed on to the legislator. And I never used to believe that actually happened, but it really does. You go in the little cubby holes up in the Senate or House side, and they're, our legislators, except for the minority and majority leader, have these tiny little desks that are just jam-packed, and they have tiny little chairs, and then their LAs have even tinier little places to sit with their laptops, and that's about all they've got: a laptop, a phone, and maybe their cup of brew or whatever it is. I'm talking cold brew, not green drink. Anyway, it's amazing, but they answer the phone and they're polite as all get out, and you talk to them and they pass on your message to the legislator. So I would encourage that whenever you've got a spare minute or two to pick up the phone and make that call. It's easier than you think. It really is pretty painless. So that's what I encourage. There's lots of more bills I could talk about, but I want to just pause for a second and see there's a whole bunch of things in the chat. And I'm happy to go ahead.
Well, there's no other questions right now on Facebook or in the chat, but I'm happy to, I can unmute people if people have questions. Be a good time to transition to open it up to the floor. If anyone would like to do that, I will let anyone unmute themselves if they have a question they'd like to propose. Thank you so much for all the information, David. I think I love the fact of calling making a big impact, because I don't think people see it making a big difference, but we've been, preaching that every little voice makes a big difference, and the more little voices you get out there, it does make an impact. So Vicky, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, I just wanted to say that some people have been telling me that people new to calling their legislators, that they've been getting like a voicemail. And so I said, just be sure to leave your name, your mailing address, and say that you are a constituent and your phone number. And those messages also get heard, that they're probably being inundated, which is a good thing. But just so people know, you can, if you get a voicemail, you can leave a message. And if you leave that information, your voice will be counted. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky.
Vicky, that's a great point. Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. Yeah. Just be persistent for sure. If there are any other questions, I'm going to inflict one other topic on you all, if that's okay.
Of course, go ahead.
Sure. There are a couple things that really, aside from the water withdrawal, that really HEC was advocating that really didn't go very far, but they're going to come up again. So I'm encouraging people to on these issues, if you're passionate about solar, for example, that you even now that it's not going anywhere, that you still call and raise your concern or voice your interest. So there was we're really pushing community solar. Indiana is way behind and kind of backwards in its promotion of solar power, particularly as it might be connected with small grid solar that might come from agriculture land or from subscriber kinds of services, even within cities. So community solar is an issue that we think people should be paying attention to. Another one that is with regard to agriculture. HEC has hired a new sustainable agriculture director who worked for 20 years in source water protection all around the state, and a guy named Toby Days, and he's just really strong in our agriculture world. So even though there weren't any bills that moved in the session this year, we're going to be working very hard throughout the year on connecting with people who are interested in sustainable agriculture situations. So that's another issue that's important to HEC. We're hoping that people will, follow and pay attention to. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Let's see. I know it's a kind of a fire hose of information, but I wanted to. There was a bill that might have interested some of your Save the Dunes members. There was a bill that would have allowed more easier construction within floodways and within fringes of lakes. And that thankfully didn't get any traction this time around, but there's always a push by folks who are interested in building wherever they want to build to erode protections to our waterways, whether it's streams or rivers or lake edges. So those are things to be paying attention to. One of the things that, like I said, this was my first session, but one of the things that I've noticed is that business interests really seem to get a lot of sway in the various committees. And so I think if you're inclined to give voice to your concerns about environmental issues, my suggestion is to couch them in terms of how whatever issue you're talking about affects your family, whether it's your kids, your grandparents, your parents, but mainly future generations, nieces and nephews, because, in the end, somebody might say wetlands, who cares? Somebody who's more interested in business issues might say that, but everybody's got a family, right? Everybody cares about their family or their close loved ones if they don't have an immediate family. And all these issues, water quality, air quality, lead in the pipes, lead in our water, all those things are affecting families. And Vicki has another question or another addition. Go ahead.
Yeah, David, can you remind me? I kind of lost track of this issue with the floodplain maps, and that they were not going to look at the Indiana maps, which were much more accurate than the federal maps. Can you tell me where that's at, or is it over? Or thank you.
Well, it's never over until it's over. But there was a lot of discussion ahead of the session with some representatives who wanted to basically ask DNR to ground truth their maps, which they discovered was an impossible task. There's just not enough DNR people. It would never be able to happen. So thankfully, I think some of that pressure to not use the DNR maps has backed off, because some of these folks were convinced that A, you can't ground truth it, and B, they really are accurate. The DNR was able to disabuse some of those myths that arose out of the last session on that score. So I can't say it's 100% solved, but I think it's on its way to a more sensible resolution on that score. The other issue yeah, sure. The other issue is there were a couple bills to try to force DNR to do a better job of communicating with people who might have a house or something in a floodplain. And again, DNR, I think, is going to come forward with some little better communication rules. So that again alleviates some of the pressure that came from last session on that score. Good questions all. I see my friend Sharon Partridge is on.
Yeah, if anyone else has any questions, you can raise your hand or go ahead and unmute and share.
David, can I ask a PFAS question? Because I know that the Biden administration has a EPA, there's a new EPA rule on PFAS. And can you just because I kind of am having a trouble, kind of keeping them straight as well. Why the 1399 bill is so bad. I know we're also opposing it, but kind of just to understand that and kind of explain it in kind of general terms for everyone.
Yeah, you almost need a chemistry degree to do this, but not having one, I'll just say this, that it's very complicated in terms of the kinds of chemicals that are being used in various manufacturing processes. And sometimes what you'll hear is that, well, we're only using these polymers, and they're more they're less reactive, more inert, however you want to say it, and so they aren't themselves biologically harmful. So we should be able to use them. But the problem that we know is happening is that the process to form PFAS polymers involves using the smaller bits, the things that make up the polymers, and those things escape into the environment. And those are the ones that 1399 is saying, have at it. We're not going to regulate that. So that's why we specifically oppose 1399. EPA is, I think they're still trying to put together a final rule, I guess. But again, it's trying to parse out which of these PFAS compounds are the most harmful. And so even if EPA comes out with its own rule, that might solve part of the problem, but not the entire problem for us here in Indiana. If the state goes ahead and passes 1399, the legislator does, then there could be still some exempt from regulation compounds that are not controlled by the federal rule and will not be controlled under any state regulation. And that's a problem. Now, further complicating the whole thing is that there are some uses of PFAS for unique, specialized medical equipment. And so there's some pushback saying, wait a minute, we should be allowed to use PFAS on that score. And I've now exhausted all I know about it. So if Vicki or anybody else has better information, I'm happy to hear it.
Well, I get that, but I guess I would say then where when you manufacture using those, where's that water going?
Well,
I think that's a valid question. I think that's a valid question. What are you doing with the water if you're going to use these chemicals in your, I'm guessing, artificial knees? I don't know. Why can't you clean your water before you put it into our water? Would be a valid question, I think.
It's a great question. And part of the problem when the state says we're not going to regulate something is then it's not part of any water quality standard. So we're not having to do it. And here's a good example. Most of us have probably heard of atrazine and allichlor, which are both commonly used pesticides for growing corn. For many, many years, there was absolutely no standard for either of those chemicals. And so every May, when farmers applied great quantities of those chemicals as their corn was coming up, the rains came and a lot of it washed off into water supplies. And so you had a huge amount of atrazine, in particular in where I live in Fort Wayne, in the water. And it was not being handled at all. It wasn't required to be handled. So now, that was 30 years ago, now it is. And Fort Wayne, I know, has figured out a way to take atrazine out of its water supply. But I think Vicki raises a good point. It's the same kind of situation. If it's something that's not currently regulated and the state says it's not going to be regulated, then it would be a very progressive water utility indeed that decided to do that and take on that expense voluntarily without being told to do it.
Just there's sorry, one comment in the chat that says Joe Brennan and his wife Leslie Shad, they live half-time in Michigan City and are happy to hear about the Indiana legislative situation. We are particularly involved with the local land trust and are worried about continuing threats to wetlands. So we're glad that people are aware and know how delicate and special our, environment is, and protecting it is definitely at the top of our hearts and Save the Dunes, and happy to hear that it's at the hearts of other people's too. And then
Yes.
Brian shared a link to a webinar held last week on PFAS by Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council in Michigan. So shared the YouTube link to that in the chat if anyone is interested in diving a little bit deeper into that.
That's excellent. Yeah, I think that's a good thing. And speaking of webinars, HEC is going to do kind of a mid-session webinar next week on February 8th, beginning at 7 p.m. And so if you want more of this, and maybe some things will be updated, certainly things will be updated by then, but you can register for free on our website for that webinar next week at 7 o'clock on HEC channels, I guess. And then I know that at the end of the session, we'll do a wrap up, and we'll also, as we have in the past, we kind of recap things and we talk about our champions and heroes, people who stood with us, especially in the legislators who did. And that's kind of useful because we don't want to forget that some people are working pretty hard on behalf of all Hoosiers. And we want to thank them. We want to make sure we recognize and acknowledge the good things that some of our people like, Senator Paul do, and you've got some good people up in the Northwest. Not so much over here in my neck of the woods in Allen County, but we want to thank those people who are doing a good job.
Definitely. Thanks so much, David. If any last questions, we still have a couple of minutes, but I will thank everybody for coming tonight, tuning in on Facebook Live and on Zoom here. I do have a couple of other announcements just so you guys can stay in the loop. This video will be recorded and live on our Save the Dunes Facebook page along with our YouTube, which has all the previous recorded green drinks presentations, and they're a plethora of information. Any topic you can think of, we've covered it probably, and have plenty more on the docket to cover the next couple of months. So next month we'll actually be covering Pollinator Gardening 101 on March 7th with Steve Sass and Amanda Smith. So please feel free to sign up for our newsletter so you can get messages and notifications about things that are going on. There's always some way to get involved. If you feel like you have the want or energy to get involved, please feel free to reach out and we can direct you in any way that we can use, constituent and community member help doing what we do. So thank you both to Hoosier advocacy groups, but also the people who live in Indiana and want to see good things happen. So thank you.
And I just want to give the last minute or so, just give my thanks to being invited to this. This is a great program, although I haven't seen anybody take a drink except me. So at any rate, the other thing I want to say is that Save the Dunes has been such a great organization for years. And I'm old enough to have met Charlotte Reed and her husband and worked with them together with Tom and Jane Dustin from my neck of the woods early in my environmental advocacy career. And it's just so great that you all are carrying on the tradition of advocacy and education. And I think all of us know that but for the efforts of folks back in the 50s and 60s, we wouldn't have any dunes. We wouldn't have any dune and swale wetlands to protect anymore, and would all be industry. So we should be really thankful for that, and for the past and for the present that you all are still doing this. Great work.
All right, well, if no other questions, we'll say